Hi AP, this is going to be a little bit of an extension on for loops on the canvas because I'm messing around with something cool and I want you guys to see it too. The reason why this is a little bit of an extension is first, we are using arcs, which I know can be confusing, and second, there's just a lot of moving pieces and a lot of nested things. So if you are interested in making something cool and creative, feel free to keep watching. If this feels overwhelming, just worry about the for loops on the canvas video. So today, you don't need anything special. There is no starter code. I am just in a blank canvas. I am going to practice using arcs in my for loop. And I know that arcs are always XY, the center of the arc, the center of the circle they're being cut from, width, height, and then start, stop around the circle. And that start, stop is in either radians or degrees. And since I have not taught Algebra 2 in a while, the first thing I'm going to do, knowing that I use arcs, is I'm going to change my angle mode to degree. So in setup, I'm going to write angle mode degrees, and I'm not going to hit play. This won't really do anything, but what it will do is make sure that I can give numbers 0 to 360 instead of giving degree measures in terms of pi, which can get really confusing for all of us. So I'm going to start out my draw function, and here's my goal, guys. I want arcs on top of each other, so I want them all to share a center point, and I want them to get smaller and smaller and smaller as you go in. And I think I want to draw like 10 of them. So here's how I'm going to start this. I know that the size needs to change, so I'm going to make a variable called the size, and I'm going to start the size at 200, because that's pretty good. Then I'm going to start my for loop, and I'm just going to enter down a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing. In my for loop, I'm going to give a value called, I don't know, num. This is my number of circles. And I'm going to start it at 0. And then as long as it's less than or equal to 10, I want this loop to keep running. And every time I want it to increase by 1, and I'm going to use that fancy notation of doing num plus plus, which remember it is the same as saying num plus equals 1, or num equals num plus 1. I'm just saving myself a little typing by doing the num plus plus. So then I'm going to put in my curly braces, and in here is where all my magic is going to happen. So here's what I'm thinking. The first loop that gets drawn, I would like to be my normal arc. I want it to be at the center of my page to start. And then I want it to be the size both ways. I don't want weirdness happening. And then for the angles, I want it to be random every time. So I'm going to make the first angle random out of 360, the second random out of 360, so it can pick any value between 0 and 360, so I don't really know what I'm getting. But then after that, I want the arc that gets drawn next to be smaller. So whatever gets drawn on top of it, I want it to shrink down a little bit. So every time the loop runs, I'm not just going to draw the arc, I'm also going to take this variable, the size, and I'm going to say the size minus equals a random value between 10 and 30. So every time it's going to get a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to play this and see what it looks like. Oh my god. So because this is in the draw function, it's picking new random values all the time. And personally, I think this looks kind of cool. And I would love to see what magic y'all could make with this. But for right now, I think I'm going to actually take everything I just drew and move it to setup. So I'm going to pause. Because that made me a little dizzy. I'm going to take lines 17 through 11, which is everything that was in my for loop. I'm going to copy it. Actually, and let me take the background too, because I don't want the background to cover what happened in setup. So I'm taking everything in the draw function, with the exception of the curly braces for the draw function. And I'm just going to paste it into setup after my angle mode degrees. And I'm going to make sure it's between those setup brackets. And then something that we don't talk about enough is if this is starting to look messy to you, we know that indentation in JavaScript won't break anything, but I can go to edit tidy code and it'll like snap everything in place for me, which is really, really nice. So now when I hit play, I get this cool thing. It's just like my spiral, but it's like, it's a little, a little disjointed, a little weird, a little cool. And my first thought is I wonder what would happen if I put color in it. So I'm going to make my color mode HSB, which gives me just, I think, a little bit more control over what I'm doing. Remember that HSB is hue, saturation, brightness. Hue is out of 360. Saturation and brightness are both out of 100. So in my for loop, I'm going to give each of these a new fill. I'm going to make the hue a random number out of 360. I'm going to make the saturation random, but instead of out of 100, I'm going to make it 50 to 70 because I want it to be a little muted. And I'm going to say that for the brightness, let's do the same. Let's do 50 to 70 just to see what happens. And then I'm going to hit play. Guys, this looks so cool. And if we notice, because it's random, I get different results every time. So the last thing that's bothering me, and then we're going to like take this to the next level, I hate the default stroke. I think it just looks like you didn't think about it or care, because I went to art school and thinking about and caring about things has been something drilled into my brain for a long time. So let's just remove the stroke from everything. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that right after the fill. I'm going to say no stroke. You guys are welcome to play with stroke weight in your own if you want. I would love to see what happens with like a random stroke weight for each one, but I think this looks so cool. I have all these overlapping guys and I have no lines and it just looks like this cool weird blur and I'm super into it. And I want to do a lot of these. So I want to put like a grid, like a tiled grid. I want them to go across and I want them to go down. So I'm going to keep tidying my code like kind of compulsively because again, lots of moving pieces. First, I'm going to give lots of room to work with. And this is, I'm going to move my canvas a few times to show you. So rather than 400, 400, I'm going to set this equal to window width and window height. And what these variables do is they look at your browser and they decide how big the window is. So when you view it, and we'll view it like this all together on present mode or full mode, I believe, it fills your whole screen. And if you resize your browser, like and you refresh, you'll get new results. So I'm gonna hit play again. Look how cool! And you can't really tell, but my canvas would be bigger if I kept hitting play. It would go to the edge. So now I need my for loop that'll go across and that'll go down. And then I'm gonna stick this for loop inside of that. So I'm gonna start coding these for loops above the for loop I just wrote, and then I'll do a little copy pasting. So I don't know how many circles it's going to take to fill my screen. So unlike what we've been doing where I was saying like I only want 10, I'm going to adjust a little bit. So I'm going to say for X position, let's start the X position at 100. So it's not going to go off the screen. It's going to be like right at the edge. As long as the X position is less than the width, then I want the X position I want to do my loop, and every time it runs, I want the X position to increase by, notice not plus plus, now it's plus equals, because I'm not going to add 1, I'm going to add a lot. I want it to increase by, let's say 220, because I think that'll give enough space between these guys that are 200 pixels big, like in diameter at the largest, and it'll draw a new one. So this is going to start at 100, it's going to jump to 220, it's going to jump to 220, every 220 it's going to draw one of these little patterns, and it's going to go until it gets to the edge. So this is fine and good. I could paste this in here, and I could get a row, which let's actually do that now and see what happens. So let me take my whole for loop, make sure you get your beginning and ending curly brace of your for loop, let's paste it in. And for some reason I'm only getting 1. Oh my god, I'm getting 1, but it's huge. So I'm getting 1 and it looks like a pie chart. So one issue that comes up right away with this is part of why this worked was that my size variable was only working for 1 pie at a time. And so it went down to 0 and then it like reset to 200 every time I hit play. Now that's not happening. So I'm going to take this size variable and I'm going to move it inside the loop so that every time the loop runs, the size is going to reset. So now I hit play. I get my little guy. Let's make my canvas nice and big. Oh, I just get 1 little guy. I think this might have to do with, oh, I know exactly why this is messing up. I never used my X position variable. So in my arc, let's change 200 to X position. And let's hit play. Oh, I have 2. And now I have 3. And if I could make my canvas even bigger, I would have 4, which is super awesome. If you're struggling in this moment, please make sure that your curly braces are matched. Tidying your code is a great way to do that. I have a curly brace here that starts the for loop that's controlling the X position. It ends on line 22. And then I have a curly brace on line 14 that ends on line 20. And this inner for loop is the one that's controlling all of my circles being drawn. This outer for loop is just controlling the X position that's changing. So my logical next step, if I want a grid of these to fill my screen, is I want to make a for loop for Y position. So I'm making this inside of that X position for loop. I'm going to make it look pretty similar. Y position is 100. Y position should now be less than the height. Y position plus equals 220. I'm going to start a curly brace here. I'm going to delete that one that autofills, and I'm going to put it like down on line 22. And then I'm going to tidy my code again. So now I have this for loop for X position. Inside of that is this for loop for Y position. Inside of that, it changes that size variable to 200, and then it runs the loop every time. After the inside of this loop runs, it goes back to the top and works its way back in until we're done looping. And if I make my canvas nice and big again, and I hit play, oh no, I ran into the same problem I did before. I forgot to use Y position. So let's go in and let's add Y position instead of that 200. Now let's hit play. Oh my god, and now I have this super cool grid, and it changes size with my screen. So I'm going to go get my, let me save this first. I'm going to go get my share link. I'm going to use this full screen one, and I'm just going to open up a new tab and paste that in. So now you guys can see this is the size of my full entire screen. If I were to resize my screen, I would get new ones. And every time I refresh this, I get a different variety of shapes. So what I would love to see you guys do is think of creative ways, if you're going for this extension, where you could try and use lots of for loops inside each other. You can think about ways where you could adjust my design that we just made. Maybe you make how they are spaced randomized. You could make the number of arcs it draws random between like 10 and 20 so that you get slightly different patterns in every single one. You could try adding different shapes that stack on top of each other. Maybe you make a triangle and you make it like do points in a different configuration. If you are someone who had me last year and you already have a little bit of knowledge about arrays, there is actually another value for arcs that decides if it looks like a pie slice or a Pac-Man or just like a straight line across. You could make an array of all those options and you could have it choose random values for that so that every arc looks a little bit different. You can mess with color, you can try and get the mouse to control things. There's so much that you guys can do if you understand this structure, and I'm really, really excited to see what you make. So if you make something cool, make sure that that's the thing that goes into your final document, or if you just make it on the side, send me an email. I'm super excited to see it. Mess with stroke rate, mess with everything, get really artsy with this. Have fun, guys.